The crystal cities of Kepler 442b were dying. Captain Lyra Moonwhisper watched from her command ship as another floating spire collapsed into the purple seas below. The beautiful towers that had taken her people 3,000 years to grow were being eaten alive by creatures that should not exist. The Void Swarm had arrived 6 months ago. At first, the Zaphirians thought they were dealing with a natural disaster. Space rocks, maybe, or some kind of cosmic storm. Then the rocks started moving. Then they started eating. Lyra pressed her long, thin fingers against the viewing screen. Her translucent skin showed the blue veins underneath, pulsing with fear. The creatures below were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They looked like giant insects made of black metal and acid. Each one was the size of a building, with mandibles that could slice through starship hulls and stomachs that dissolved everything they touched. "Captain," her science officer called out. Dr. Zara Silverwing floated over to her, moving gracefully in the low gravity that all Zaphirians preferred. "The breeding calculations are complete. At their current consumption rate, they will strip our world bare in 47 days. 47 days. Lyra closed her eyes and tried not to think about the billions of her people still trapped on the planet below. The Zaphirians had always been peaceful. Their worst conflict in recorded history had been a disagreement over mining rights that lasted 3 days and ended with a poetry contest. They had no weapons, no armies, no concept of killing anything larger than the tiny glowing fish they kept as pets. "Have we heard back from the Galactic Council?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer from Zara's expression. "The Cronan Empire sent their regrets. They say the Void Swarm is too dangerous for honorable combat. The Vegan Confederacy ran computer simulations and determined that intervention would result in unacceptable losses. The Ethereal Collective." Zara paused, her silver eyes reflecting the dying light from their homeworld. "They said we should try to communicate with the creatures, find out what they want." Lyra almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about watching your species face extinction. "What they want is obvious. They want to eat everything. The Void Swarm had no technology that anyone could understand. They didn't build ships so much as grow them from their own bodies. They didn't use weapons because they were weapons. Every attempt at communication had failed because there was nothing to communicate with. The creatures were hunger-given form, and they had found a planet full of food." "Send the message again," Lyra ordered. "Broadcast on all frequencies. Someone in this galaxy has to care about justice." But even as she said it, Lyra knew it was hopeless. The galaxy was a big place, and every species looked out for themselves first. The Zaphirians had nothing to offer in trade for military help. Their planet was beautiful but not strategic. Their technology was advanced but focused on art and healing, not warfare. Their culture was rich but held no secrets that warrior races wanted to learn. They were, in the cold mathematics of galactic politics, expendable. Far across the galaxy, in a small blue and green world that most species considered barely civilized, Lieutenant Commander Jake Mitchell was pulling a night shift at the Deep Space Communications Array. The facility sat in the Nevada desert, its massive dishes pointed at the stars, listening for signals from the void. Jake had been doing this job for 8 years, ever since humanity had figured out how to decode basic galactic standard transmissions. Most of what came through was boring trade negotiations or weather reports from species humanity had never heard of. The galaxy, it turned out, was full of bureaucrats. Tonight felt different, though. The computers had been picking up fragments of something urgent. A distress signal, maybe, though it wasn't coming through the usual diplomatic channels. Jake adjusted his headset and started cleaning up the transmission. What he heard made him sit up straight in his chair. The voice was obviously alien, speaking in the musical tones that marked most advanced species, but underneath the pretty language was raw terror. Jake had heard that tone before, during the food riots in Chicago, during the hurricane that nearly took out Miami, during the first contact incidents that everyone pretended had gone smoothly. This was the sound of someone who knew they were about to die. Jake recorded the message and ran it through the translation software. The words that came back made his blood run cold. Planetary invasion, species extinction, desperate plea for help. The coordinates pointed to a system 47 light-years away, home to something called the Zaphirian Republic. The request for aid had been sent to every major power in the galaxy, and judging by the timestamps, every major power had ignored it. Jake picked up his secure phone and dialed Admiral Lisa Rodriguez's direct line. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting bad news. "This better be important, Mitchell. I've got a budget meeting with Congress in 4 hours. Admiral, we've got a situation. There's a species under attack asking for military intervention. Every other power in the galaxy has said no." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. Jake could hear her moving around, probably getting dressed. "Send me everything. I'll be there in an hour." While Jake waited, he kept listening to the alien transmissions. More fragments were coming in, painting a picture of a war that wasn't really a war. The Zaphirians kept talking about their defense fleet, but their tactics sounded like they were trying to hug the enemy to death. They spoke of minimal force responses and ethical guidelines for engagement while their planet burned. These people had never been in a real fight in their lives. Admiral Rodriguez arrived exactly 60 minutes later, along with her aide and a pot of coffee that could fuel a small spacecraft. She was a small, tough woman who had earned her stars fighting pirates in the outer colonies and politicians in Washington. She listened to the recordings twice, read the translation, and studied the tactical data that Jake had pulled together. "So let me get this straight," she said finally. "These bug things are eating an entire planet. The locals are too nice to fight back properly, and every military power in the galaxy has decided it's not their problem." "That's about the size of it, ma'am." Rodriguez smiled, and Jake felt a little sorry for whatever was about to get in her way. "Jake, send a message to the president. Tell her we've got a situation that requires immediate attention. Then get me General Webb, Admiral Stone, and Dr. Barnes from Xenobiology. We're going to need a full threat assessment." "Ma'am, shouldn't we go through the State Department? This is technically a diplomatic matter." "Son, when someone's house is on fire, you don't form a committee to discuss water pressure. You grab a hose and get to work." She paused at the door. "Besides, this isn't diplomacy. This is pest control." 24 hours later, the message came back from the Zaphirian fleet. Captain Moonwhisper had been trying to coordinate the evacuation of their last orbital city when her communications officer started shouting, "Captain, we're receiving a response to our distress call." Lyra rushed over, hope fluttering in her chest like one of the tiny light birds from her home province. "Which fleet? The Cronins? The Vegas?" "Unknown, Captain. The signal is coming from somewhere called Earth. The message is very short." Lyra activated the main screen. The transmission was poor quality, obviously sent across vast distances without the benefit of proper relay stations. The voice was rough, speaking in a language her computers barely recognized, but the translation came through clearly. "Zaphirian Fleet, this is Earth Defense Command. We received your distress call. Help is coming. Hold your position and transmit all tactical data on hostile forces. Admiral Rodriguez sends her regards." The transmission ended. The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of their dying world below. "Earth?" Zara whispered. "I've never heard of them. Are they in the Galactic Council?" Lyra checked her databases. What she found made her heart sink. Earth was listed as a developing world, barely past nuclear weapons, not even considered worthy of full diplomatic contact. But they were the only ones who had answered. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez stood in the Situation Room deep beneath the Pentagon, surrounded by screens showing star charts, ship manifests, and intelligence reports. The coffee had grown cold hours ago, but she kept drinking it anyway. Around the table sat the most experienced military minds humanity had to offer. General Marcus Webb commanded the Space Marines. He was a big man with scars on his hands from the Mars Rebellion and a reputation for solving problems with the right amount of explosives in the right places. Next to him sat Admiral Patricia Stone, who ran the Deep Space Fleet. She had been born on Europa and raised on stories of humanity fighting against impossible odds. Dr. Kevin Barnes looked out of place among the uniforms. The xenobiology expert was thin and pale, more comfortable with computer models than combat plans. But he understood alien life forms better than anyone alive, and right now that made him the most important person in the room. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Rodriguez said, pointing at the holographic display showing the Zaphirian system. "These void swarm creatures are essentially giant bugs that eat everything they touch, reproduce by consuming organic matter, and have acid for blood. That's a simplified version, but essentially correct," Dr. Barnes replied. "Based on the data the Zaphirian sent us, each individual organism is roughly the size of a city bus, travels in swarms of several thousand, and can dissolve most known materials." General Webb leaned back in his chair. "So basically, they're like the things we fought on Titan, except bigger and hungrier. The Titan parasites were contained to one moon," Admiral Stone pointed out. "These things have consumed half a planet and show no signs of slowing down." Rodriguez studied the tactical reports. The Zaphirians had provided detailed scans of the creatures, their behavior patterns, and their weaknesses. What she saw didn't impress her. Their acid doesn't work on ceramics or certain metal alloys. They hunt in predictable patterns. They're vulnerable to extreme heat and electromagnetic pulses. Hell, they're basically organic machines with obvious design flaws. Dr. Barnes nodded. "That's what puzzles me. Every other species in the galaxy treats them like an unstoppable force of nature. But from a human perspective, they're just another hostile life form. Dangerous, yes, but not impossible to deal with. Maybe that's because other species haven't had to deal with hostile life forms the way we have," Webb suggested. "When was the last time the Zaphirians had to fight anything more dangerous than a stubborn flower?" Rodriguez pulled up the cultural files on the Zaphirian Republic. What she read made her shake her head. Their last military conflict was 300 years ago, and it was settled by a dance competition. Their idea of a weapon is a device that makes loud noises to scare away small animals. They've never had to develop tactics for fighting swarms, dealing with acid attacks, or coordinating large-scale military operations. "What about the other species?" Stone asked. "The Cronins, the Vegas, the Ethereals? They must have militaries." "They do, but they're built around different concepts of warfare," Dr. Barnes explained. "The Cronins believe in honorable single combat between elite warriors. The Vegan Confederacy relies on technological superiority and precision strikes. The Ethereals try to solve everything through diplomacy and mental powers." Webb laughed. "And none of that works against a swarm of hungry bugs that don't care about honor, can't be reasoned with, and adapt to technology." "Exactly. But humans developed our military doctrine, fighting against everything from wild animals to natural disasters to each other. We know how to deal with swarms. We've been handling corrosive materials for centuries, and we've never met a problem we couldn't solve with the right application of controlled violence." Rodriguez made her decision. "Dr. Barnes, I need a full biological analysis. Find out everything you can about these creatures. Weaknesses, reproductive cycles, feeding patterns, everything. General Webb, start putting together an expeditionary force. I want Marines who fought in hostile environments and can adapt quickly. Admiral Stone, we're going to need ships that can handle acid attacks and operate in a war zone." "How many ships are we talking about?" Stone asked. 3 should be enough to start. The battlecruiser USS Defiance, the assault carrier USS Thunder, and a support vessel. Maybe 5,000 Marines total." Webb raised an eyebrow. 5,000? "Ma'am, the Zaphirians are talking about billions of these creatures." 5,000 human Marines, Rodriguez corrected. "There's a difference." While the military planners worked out the details, Rodriguez placed a call to President Amanda Scott. The president was in a cabinet meeting, but she took the call anyway when her aide mentioned it was about an alien invasion. "Lisa, please tell me this isn't another false alarm like the thing with the Martian mining dispute." "No, ma'am, this is the real deal. We have a friendly alien species facing extinction, and they've asked for help. Every other major power has refused. Why? Because they're scared. The enemy is something called the Void Swarm, and apparently they've never seen anything like it. But from our perspective, it's just a pest control problem with bigger pests." President Scott was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" "Authorization for a military intervention in the Kepler 442 system. 3 ships, 5,000 personnel, full combat loadout. Casualties? Minimal, if our analysis is correct. These things are dangerous but predictable. Our people have dealt with worse. Political fallout? Probably none. We're not officially part of the Galactic community yet, so we're not bound by their treaties or protocols. If anything, this might get us noticed in a good way." The president made her decision quickly. the same way she had handled every crisis since taking office. Do it, but Lisa, I want regular reports. If this goes sideways, I need to know immediately. Yes, ma'am. We'll have the fleet ready to launch in 72 hours. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Colonel Ryan Murphy was pulled from leave to command the ground forces. He had fought in every major human conflict of the past 20 years and had a reputation for completing impossible missions with minimal losses. Captain Nicole Davis took command of the USS Defiance. She was young for a battlecruiser captain, but had earned her position during the pirate wars in the outer system. Her ship was built like a flying fortress, designed to punch through enemy lines and keep fighting even when half the systems were offline. Captain Brandon Lee got the USS Thunder, the newest assault carrier in the fleet. The ship was loaded with dropships, fighters, and enough Marines to invade a small planet, which, Rodriguez reflected, was exactly what they were about to do. Captain Helen Garcia commanded the USS Mercy, officially listed as a support vessel, but actually carrying enough medical supplies, engineering equipment, and emergency rations to rebuild a civilization. Dr. Amy Foster joined the mission as head xenobiologist. She was Dr. Barnes's best student and the only person who had actually requested assignment to the mission. Everyone else had volunteered, but she had specifically asked to study live void swarm specimens. You do realize these things are trying to eat an entire planet? Colonel Murphy had asked her during the briefing. That's what makes them interesting. She had replied with the kind of enthusiasm that made career soldiers nervous. As the fleet prepared to depart from Luna Station, Admiral Rodriguez received one last message from the Zaphirian fleet. Captain Moonwhisper's translator was working better now, and her desperation came through clearly. Earthships, we have lost 3 more orbital cities since your last transmission. The creatures have begun attacking our evacuation vessels. We do not know how much longer we can hold position. Please advise your estimated arrival time. Rodriguez looked at the departure schedule. The journey would take 3 weeks at maximum jump speed. She composed her reply carefully. Zaphirian fleet, this is Admiral Rodriguez. Our ships launch in 6 hours. Estimated arrival is 21 days. Continue evacuation procedures and avoid direct engagement with hostile forces. Help is coming. What she didn't add was the message Colonel Murphy had asked her to include. Tell them to keep their heads down and stay out of our way. We've got this. The 3 ships launched on schedule, disappearing into hyperspace with enough firepower to level a continent and enough determination to see the job done. Behind them, Earth continued its daily business, unaware that humanity was about to announce itself to the galaxy in the most human way possible. By solving someone else's problem with violence, efficiency, and a complete disregard for the word impossible. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, like 3 angry hornets entering a garden party. Captain Nicole Davis stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching the tactical displays update with target information. What she saw made her jaw clench. The planet below was half dead. Where the Zaphirian reports had described floating crystal cities and bioluminescent forests, she now saw massive craters and dark spots that looked like infected wounds. Huge ships moved in orbit around the dying world, each one the size of a city block and covered in what looked like organic armor. Jesus, muttered Lieutenant Paul Carter from the sensor station. How many of those things are there? Computer counts 47 capital ships, maybe 300 smaller vessels, reported Commander Sarah Walsh, the ship's executive officer. And that's just what we can see on the surface. Captain Davis opened a channel to the other ships in her small fleet. Thunder, Mercy, you seeing this? Affirmative, Defiance, came Captain Lee's voice from the assault carrier. My Marines are getting restless. They want to know when we start the party. Soon enough. First we need to find our hosts. The Zaphirian fleet was hiding behind the system's largest moon, exactly where they had said they would be. As the human ships approached, Captain Davis got her first look at alien military technology. The Zaphirian vessels were beautiful, all flowing curves and transparent sections that caught the starlight like jewelry. They looked more like art pieces than warships. Incoming transmission, announced Lieutenant Carter. Audio and visual. Captain Moonwhisper appeared on the main screen and Davis had to resist the urge to stare. The alien captain was tall and thin, with skin so pale it was almost transparent. Her large silver eyes reflected the light from her ship's bridge, and when she spoke her voice sounded like music. Human vessel. This is Captain Moonwhisper of the Zaphirian Defense Fleet. We are honored by your arrival and grateful for your assistance in our time of need. Davis kept her reply short and professional. Captain Moonwhisper, I'm Captain Davis of the USS Defiance. We're here to help. I need to speak with your senior officers about tactical coordination. Of course, we have prepared detailed briefings on enemy capabilities, environmental concerns, and proposed engagement protocols. Dr. Silverwing has compiled extensive data on sustainable combat practices and minimal impact strategies. Davis exchanged glances with her executive officer. This was going to be interesting. An hour later, the human senior staff gathered in the conference room aboard the USS Defiance. The Zaphirian delegation had arrived in a small shuttle that looked like it was made of spun glass and good intentions. Captain Moonwhisper brought Dr. Silverwing and 3 other officers whose names Davis couldn't pronounce. Colonel Murphy represented the ground forces, looking like he had been carved out of granite and bad attitude. Dr. Foster sat quietly in the corner, taking notes on everything the aliens did. Captain Garcia had joined by video link from the USS Mercy. Let me start by saying we appreciate your courage in coming to our aid, Captain Moonwhisper began. The Void Swarm represents a threat unlike anything the galaxy has seen. Their adaptive capabilities and reproductive efficiency make conventional warfare ineffective. Colonel Murphy leaned forward. Lady, with respect, we're not here for conventional warfare. We're here to kill bugs. Now, where are they and how do we get to them? Dr. Silverwing looked shocked. But surely you understand the complexity of the situation. These creatures have integrated themselves into our planetary ecosystem. Any aggressive action could cause irreversible environmental damage. Doc, your planet's already dying, Murphy replied. At this point, environmental damage is the least of your worries. Captain Moonwhisper activated a holographic display showing the planet's surface. The Void Swarm has established 17 primary hive complexes, each one containing approximately 50,000 individuals. They have converted our crystal cities into breeding facilities and transformed our forests into feeding grounds. What's their response time when attacked? Davis asked. Response time? How fast do they react when you hit them? Do they send reinforcements? Do they retreat? Do they adapt their tactics? The Zaphirian officers looked at each other uncertainly. We have not conducted direct attacks, Dr. Silverwing admitted. Our strategy has focused on evacuation and preservation of cultural artifacts. The room fell silent. Finally, Colonel Murphy spoke up. You mean you've been fighting these things for 6 months and you've never actually fought them? We attempted several reconnaissance missions and defensive actions, Captain Moonwhisper said, sounding defensive. But our weapon systems proved ineffective and we lost too many ships to continue aggressive operations. What kind of weapons do you use? Dr. Foster asked, speaking for the first time. Gravitational disruptors, quantum field manipulators, and consciousness adjustment rays. Davis tried to translate that into something she could understand. Do any of your weapons actually explode? Explode? Dr. Silverwing looked confused. Why would we want to create uncontrolled energy releases? The environmental impact alone would be catastrophic. Colonel Murphy stood up and walked to the display showing the planet. Captain, I need you to understand something. These creatures are eating your world. They don't care about environmental impact. They don't care about cultural preservation. They care about food, reproduction, and spreading to the next planet. He pointed at one of the hive complexes. You see this as a delicate ecosystem that needs to be preserved. I see 17 targets that need to be destroyed before they can launch more ships. But the civilian casualties, Captain Moonwhisper protested. There are still millions of our people trapped on the surface. And they'll all be dead in a month if we don't act, Murphy replied. Ma'am, sometimes you have to break some eggs to make an omelet. Dr. Silverwing turned to Dr. Foster. Surely you, as a scientist, understand the importance of studying these creatures. They represent a unique form of evolution, a perfect adaptation to resource consumption. There must be ways to coexist. Dr. Foster looked up from her notes. Actually, I've been studying your data, and these things aren't as perfect as you think. They have several critical vulnerabilities. She activated her own display, showing biological scans of captured Void Swarm specimens. They're silicon-based, which means they're vulnerable to certain types of acid. They reproduce through consumption, but they need specific temperature ranges for egg development. Most importantly, they're actually quite stupid. What do you mean? Captain Moonwhisper asked. They operate on instinct, not intelligence. They follow pheromone trails, respond to chemical signals, and hunt in predictable patterns. From a human perspective, they're just very large insects with some unusual dietary requirements. Colonel Murphy smiled, and the Zaphirians seemed to sense that something had shifted in the room. Dr. Foster, in your professional opinion, how would you deal with a really big bug problem? Same way we've always dealt with bug problems on Earth. Identify their breeding sites, disrupt their food supply, and use targeted pesticides to eliminate the population. Pesticides? Dr. Silverwing asked weakly. Chemical weapons designed to kill specific types of organisms, Dr. Foster explained cheerfully. We've been using them for centuries. Very effective against insects. Captain Davis turned to Colonel Murphy. Colonel, how long would you need to clear those hive sites? Murphy studied the tactical display. Give me 2 weeks for reconnaissance and preparation. Another week to hit the primary breeding facilities. Call it a month to mop up the survivors. A month? Captain Moonwhisper stared at the humans as if they had grown extra heads. But the simulations show that any direct assault would result in total fleet annihilation. Your simulations, Davis corrected. Based on your tactics and your weapons. We use different tactics. What tactics? Dr. Silverwing asked, though she sounded like she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Colonel Murphy's grin was not reassuring. Simple ones. We find where they live, we go there, and we kill everything that moves. Then we burn what's left and salt the earth so nothing grows back. The Zaphirian delegation looked horrified. Captain Moonwhisper spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. But the cultural sites, the historical artifacts, the environmental preservation zones, will still be there when we're done, Captain Davis said. Just without the giant bugs trying to eat them. Dr. Foster looked up from her biological scans. Actually, based on the reproduction data you've provided, I think Colonel Murphy's timeline is too conservative. If we hit them hard and fast, we could have this wrapped up in 2 weeks. The meeting ended with the Zaphirians agreeing to provide detailed planetary maps and sensor data. As the alien delegation prepared to leave, Captain Moonwhisper turned back to the humans. I must ask, are all human military operations so direct? Colonel Murphy considered the question seriously. Ma'am, we've been fighting wars on a planet where everything is trying to kill us since before we invented fire. We learned a long time ago that the best way to deal with something that wants to eat you is to eat it first. As the Zaphirian shuttle departed, Captain Davis turned to her senior staff. All right, people. The first battle happened in the asteroid belt around Kepler 442b. Captain Davis had been hoping to test human weapons against the Void Swarm before committing to a full planetary assault. She got her chance when a massive hive ship broke orbit and moved to intercept the human fleet. The alien vessel was 3 kilometers long and looked like it had been grown rather than built. Its hull rippled with organic patterns, and acidic weapons protruded from its surface like the spines of some deep-sea nightmare. It moved slowly but deliberately, trailing smaller ships that swarmed around it like angry wasps. Zaphirian fleet, this is Captain Davis. Pull back to safe distance and observe. We're going to show you how humans handle pest control. Captain Moonwhisper's voice came back immediately. Captain Davis, that vessel destroyed our entire 3rd Fleet. Recommend immediate withdrawal and regrouping. Noted, Davis replied, then switched to internal communications. All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage a hostile alien vessel. Remember your training, trust your equipment, and show these bugs why humans are the apex predators in this galaxy. The USS Defiance turned toward the hive ship and accelerated. The alien vessel responded by launching a cloud of acid projectiles that would have melted through any Zaphirian ship's hull in seconds. They splashed harmlessly against the Defiance's armor plating. Armor holding, reported Commander Walsh. Their acid isn't strong enough to penetrate our hull. Figures, Davis muttered. These things evolved to fight species that build their ships out of crystal and good intentions. Thunder, you're cleared for boarding action. The USS Thunder launched a squadron of assault shuttles loaded with Marines in full combat armor. Lieutenant Tony Ramos led the first wave. His team equipped with plasma cutters, explosive charges, and enough ammunition to level a city block. The shuttles punched through the hive ship's outer hull like bullets through paper. The aliens had never encountered kinetic penetration weapons before, and their organic armor was designed to resist energy beams and acid attacks, not high-velocity metal projectiles. Once inside, The Marines found themselves in a nightmare of pulsing corridors and dripping walls. The ship's interior was alive, with veins of some unknown fluid running through the bulkheads and breathing sounds coming from the walls themselves. "This is like being inside a giant stomach," Private Jennifer Lopez reported over the radio. "Everything's wet and it smells like death." "Stay focused," Ramos replied. "Find the central nervous system and plant the charges." The Void Swarm warriors they encountered were exactly what Dr. Foster had predicted. Each one was the size of a small car, with mandibles that could snap a human in half and acid that could dissolve steel. They were also incredibly stupid. The aliens charged straight at the Marines with no tactics beyond run at the enemy and try to eat them. Against species that had never developed armor or rapid-fire weapons, this approach had been devastatingly effective. Against humans who had been fighting coordinated battles for thousands of years, it was suicide. Corporal Daniel White set up his machine gun at a corridor junction and mowed down 6 of the creatures before they could get within 50 meters of his position. Private Lopez used her grenade launcher to collapse a section of the ship's digestive system, trapping a dozen more aliens in their own acid. "These things fight like animals," Sergeant Carlos Rivera reported. "No coordination, no tactics, just pure aggression. My squad's cleared 3 decks already." Back on the USS Defiance, Captain Davis watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The boarding parties were making steady progress through the hive ship, and the alien vessel's return fire was becoming sporadic and uncoordinated. "Captain Moonwhisper, are you monitoring our progress?" she asked over the communications channel. "Yes, Captain Davis, we do not understand how this is possible. That vessel destroyed 12 of our ships." "Different approach," Davis replied. "Your people tried to fight these things like they were intelligent opponents. We're treating them like the animals they are." The breakthrough came when Lieutenant Ramos found what Dr. Foster had told them to look for. Deep in the ship's core was a massive chamber filled with a pulsing, brain-like organ that seemed to control the vessel's functions. It was defended by the largest Void Swarm warriors anyone had seen, each one the size of a small building. "Found the brain," Ramos reported, "and it's got some big friends guarding it." "How big?" Colonel Murphy asked from the tactical center. "Think elephant-sized cockroaches with extra teeth." "Standard procedure." "Explosives?" "Already set." "Recommend immediate evacuation." The Marines pulled back through the corridors they had cleared, fighting a running battle against increasingly desperate alien defenders. The Void Swarm seemed to sense that their ship was dying, and their attacks became more frenzied but no more effective. Ramos and his team made it to their extraction point just as the charges detonated. The explosion tore through the hive ship's central nervous system, and the massive vessel began to convulse like a dying animal. Its weapons went silent, its engines stopped, and its smaller escort ships scattered in confusion. "Target neutralized," Ramos reported. "The big bug is dead." Captain Davis opened a channel to the Zaphirian fleet. "Captain Moonwhisper, as you can see, the hostile vessel has been eliminated. Total human casualties, 0. Time elapsed, 47 minutes. The alien captain's response was barely a whisper. "How?" "Proper tactics and the right tools for the job," Davis replied. "Now let's talk about the Planetary assault." The attack on Kepler 442b began 3 days later. Colonel Murphy had used the time to study the planet's surface and identify the 17 hive complexes that the Void Swarm had built from the ruins of Zaphirian cities. The first wave consisted of orbital bombardment from the USS Defiance. Captain Davis targeted the largest hive complex with tungsten rod projectiles accelerated to nearly 10% of light speed. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to several nuclear weapons, but without the radiation or long-term environmental damage. The crystal spires that had taken the Zaphirian centuries to grow were vaporized in seconds, along with the organic growths that the Void Swarm had built around them. The aliens' response was immediate and predictable. Every creature within 100 kilometers swarmed toward the impact site. "Like kicking an anthill," observed Major Steve Jackson, who was commanding the ground forces from the USS Thunder. "They're all coming to investigate the disturbance." "Perfect," Colonel Murphy replied. "That's exactly what we want them to do. They are." Second wave was chemical weapons. Dr. Foster had developed a compound based on Earth insecticides that was specifically designed to disrupt the Void Swarm's respiratory system. The gas was deployed by high-altitude drones and spread across the gathering alien forces like a deadly fog. The effect was immediate and devastating. The creatures that had been swarming toward the bombardment site began convulsing and collapsing. Within minutes, thousands of the aliens were dead or dying, their bodies dissolving into the acidic pools they had created around their hives. Chemical agent is highly effective, Dr. Foster reported from her monitoring station. Mortality rate approaching 98% in the target area. The third wave was the Marines themselves. Colonel Murphy led 5,000 soldiers in a coordinated assault on the remaining hive complexes. They landed in armored transports, established defensive perimeters, and began the systematic extermination of every void swarm creature they could find. Private Sam Roberts from Texas found himself face to face with a group of alien warriors in what had once been a Zaphirian art gallery. The beautiful sculptures had been partially digested and converted into egg chambers, with hundreds of small creatures crawling over the remains. "Well, that's just disrespectful," Roberts muttered, then opened fire with his flamethrower. The battle raged for 6 hours. The void swarm threw everything they had at the human forces: acid-spitting flyers, burrowing tunnel makers, and massive queen creatures the size of tanks. The humans responded with tactics developed in 100 different wars on a dozen different worlds. Sergeant Lisa Parker from Detroit used shaped charges to collapse the tunnel networks that connected the hives. Captain Sandra Hill's artillery unit provided continuous fire support, turning the alien breeding grounds into craters of molten glass. Lieutenant Bobby Cruz led his squad in urban warfare through the ruins of Zaphirian cities, clearing buildings room by room with the methodical efficiency of a professional exterminator. When the sun set on Kepler 442b that day, the largest void swarm infestation in galactic history had been reduced to scattered survivors hiding in caves and abandoned buildings. The species that had terrorized entire star systems was running for their lives from an enemy they had never encountered. Before that, Colonel Murphy's final report to Admiral Rodriguez was characteristically brief. Mission accomplished. 17 primary targets eliminated. Estimated 94% enemy casualties. Human losses, 43 wounded, 2 killed in action. Recommend immediate follow-up operations to eliminate remaining stragglers. Captain Moonwhisper watched the human victory from orbit, her silver eyes reflecting the fires burning on her homeworld's surface. For the first time in months, those fires were not spreading. 6 weeks after the first human ships entered the Kepler 442 system, Colonel Murphy stood on what had once been the most beautiful balcony on the Zaphirian homeworld. The crystal platform overlooked a valley that had been turned into a void swarm breeding ground, but now showed the first signs of new growth. Zaphirian cleanup crews were working below, carefully removing the last traces of alien contamination. "Final sweep complete," reported Captain Sandra Hill over the radio. "No active hostiles detected in sectors 7 through 12. "That's the last of them, sir." Murphy nodded and keyed his communicator. "All units, this is command. Mission complete. The void swarm has been eliminated from Kepler 442b. Begin extraction procedures." The words felt strange in his mouth. In his 30-year military career, Murphy had never been part of a campaign that went exactly according to plan. There were always complications, unexpected enemy tactics, or equipment failures that extended operations for months. But the void swarm had been as predictable as Dr. Foster said they would be. They were just bugs. Very large, very hungry bugs, but bugs nonetheless. Captain Moonwhisper found Murphy an hour later, still standing on the balcony. The Zaphirian captain looked different now. 6 weeks of watching humans work had changed something in her silver eyes. She moved with more purpose, spoke with more directness. "Colonel Murphy," she said, her voice carrying only a trace of the musical quality that had marked her speech before. "I wanted to thank you personally before your ships depart. Just doing our job, ma'am. Your people would have done the same for us." Moonwhisper was quiet for a long moment. "No, Colonel. We would not have. We would have formed committees, held conferences, and debated the ethical implications until our world was nothing but acid and bones." Murphy studied the alien woman. "You're being too hard on yourself. Your people survived for thousands of years by being peaceful. That's not a weakness, perhaps not, but it is a limitation." She gestured toward the valley below, where human engineering teams were already installing new atmospheric processors. "In 6 weeks, you accomplished what our greatest military mind said was impossible. You did it with weapons we consider primitive and tactics we thought barbaric. Different problems need different solutions, Murphy replied. Your people never had to deal with something like the Void Swarm before. And you? Murphy thought about the question. Earth's a rough place, Captain. Always has been. Ice ages, volcanoes, plagues, predators that could eat you in one bite. We've been fighting for survival since we climbed down from the trees. When you spend 1,000,000 years dealing with things that want to kill you, you get good at killing them back. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Foster's voice over the communicator. Colonel, you need to see this. We've got something interesting in the main laboratory. Murphy and Captain Moonwhisper made their way to the research facility that the humans had established in the ruins of a Zaphirian university. Dr. Foster was waiting for them with a collection of specimens and data displays that made the Zaphirian captain look queasy. What did you find, Doc? Murphy asked. The Void Swarm wasn't native to this galaxy, Foster explained, pointing to a genetic analysis on her screen. Based on the molecular structure, I'd say they came from somewhere in the Andromeda galaxy, probably riding on a comet or asteroid. Invasive species? Murphy nodded. Like kudzu or zebra mussels back home? Exactly. And here's the interesting part. They're not actually very successful as a species. They're what we call a boom and bust organism. They consume everything in sight, reproduce rapidly, then exhaust their food supply and die off. Captain Moonwhisper leaned forward. Then why were they so dangerous? Because every species they encountered before humans tried to fight them the wrong way, Foster continued. The Void Swarm evolved to deal with energy weapons, defensive tactics, and attempts at communication. They had no defense against kinetic weapons, chemical warfare, and a species that treats them like the pests they actually are. Dr. Zara Silverwing had arrived during the explanation. The Zaphirian scientist looked at the data with a mixture of fascination and horror. You mean all this time we were overthinking the problem? Way overthinking it, Foster confirmed. These things have been terrorizing the galaxy for 50 years, but they're actually quite fragile. Their acid doesn't work against proper armor. Their tactics are completely predictable, and they have no resistance to Earth-standard pesticides. Murphy's communicator buzzed with an incoming transmission from Admiral Rodriguez. Colonel, I'm getting some interesting reports from deep space monitoring stations. It seems word of our little pest control operation has spread. What kind of reports, Admiral? The Cronin Empire wants to hire us to deal with a pirate problem. The Vegan Confederacy is asking about our military advisors. And the Ethereal Collective wants to know if we're available for what they're calling aggressive conflict resolution services. Murphy looked at Captain Moonwhisper, who was trying not to smile. Seems like we found ourselves a new career field, Admiral. That's not all, Rodriguez continued. The Galactic Council wants to meet with our diplomatic team. Apparently, they're interested in discussing humanity's status as a developing civilization. 3 days later, Ambassador Carol Wright stood before the Galactic Council on the space station orbiting Vega Prime. The chamber was enormous, filled with representatives from dozens of species, all of them watching the human delegation with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed fear. The council speaker was a tall, elegant being from the Ethereal Collective, whose name translated roughly to wise. Dawn over still waters. She spoke in the traditional, formal style that marked all council proceedings. Ambassador Wright of the human species, the council recognizes your presence and acknowledges the recent actions of your military forces in the Kepler 442 system. Wright kept her response simple and direct. Thank you, Speaker. We were happy to help a species in need. The elimination of the Void Swarm threat has been observed with great interest by the galactic community. Many species had considered this threat to be insurmountable. Different perspective, Speaker. What looked impossible to you looked routine to us. The chamber fell silent. Finally, the speaker continued. The council has questions about human military capabilities and intentions. Your species demonstrated the ability to eliminate a threat that had resisted our combined efforts for 50 years. This raises concerns about the balance of power in the galaxy. Wright had expected this question. Speaker, humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We're not looking to pick fights with anyone, but we're also not going to stand by and watch innocent people get eaten by space bugs when we can do something about it. And if the council were to request your assistance with other pest control problems, we'd consider it, assuming the price is right and the cause is just. A representative from the Cronin Empire stood up. Commander Steele, who cuts through lies, was a massive warrior whose species valued direct action above all else. Human ambassador, my people respect strength. Your warriors fought with honor and achieved victory. Would you consider teaching our soldiers your methods? We could work something out, Wright replied. Though I should warn you, our methods tend to be pretty straightforward. Some species find them a bit harsh. Harsh how? Asked Dr. Gentle, flowing wisdom from the Vegan Confederacy. Wright considered her answer carefully. We have a saying on Earth, if you want to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. When we deal with threats, we don't try to negotiate with them, outthink them, or find elegant solutions. We identify the problem, and then apply overwhelming force until the problem stops existing. The chamber erupted in whispered conversations in dozens of languages. Finally, the speaker called for order. The Council will consider humanity's new status in the galactic community. In the meantime, we have several situations that might benefit from your unique approach to problem solving. Wright smiled. Speaker, we'd be happy to help. Just remember, when you call Earth for assistance, you're not getting diplomats or negotiators. You're getting pest control specialists who happen to be very good at their job. Back on Earth, Admiral Rodriguez was reading the after-action reports when her aide brought her a cup of coffee and a stack of new requests for assistance. Admiral, we've got 17 different species asking for military assistance with various problems. Pirates, aggressive wildlife, territorial disputes, and something called stellar parasites that I don't even want to think about. Rodriguez took a sip of her coffee and smiled. Looks like humanity just found its niche in the galactic economy. Get me a meeting with the president. I think we need to start a new department. What should we call it? Earth Defense Solutions, Rodriguez replied. Our motto can be, we handle the hard cases. Outside her office window, construction crews were already breaking ground on the new training facilities. The galaxy had spent 50 years learning to fear the Void Swarm. Now they were about to learn what happened when you called in the species that considered them nothing more than an extermination job. Humanity had arrived on the Galactic stage not as conquerors or diplomats, but as the neighbors you called when you had a really bad pest problem and needed someone who wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty.